Held at Edwards Air Force Base in California, the Aerospace Valley Airshow 2022 was a rare opportunity to visit hallowed ground, 75 years after the first official supersonic flight, which took place at this very base. Unlike any other airshow on Earth, this feat was demonstrated by two of NASA's flying test beds, which performed different types of sonic boom at high altitude. NASA also performed flybys with their flying observatory, SOFIA, making its first and probably final airshow appearance. Team Edwards mounted an impressive combat demonstration, including a mock bomb run and a full aileron roll by a B-1 Lancer. This is our pick of the action.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Airshow Dispatches, this time coming to you from Edwards Air Force Base in California. It's our first show in the States in 3 years. It's the first show here at Edwards in 13 years, and for that reason we will be bringing you an awful lot of aircraft that we have never featured in Airshow Dispatches before. We'll be starting with the combat demonstration involving a variety of aircraft types based here at Edwards, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Team Edwards' combat demonstration opened with a fast pass by an F-35A Raptor. This was followed by an acknowledgement of the importance of aerial refuelling in almost any combat scenario. Here, the F-22 lining up behind a KC-135R Strato tanker, while a second fifth-generation fighter, an F-35A Lightning II, holds station on the wing. This scenario will see the capture of an enemy airfield, and the first stage is to establish air superiority. The F-22 and F-35 are called in first to dispense with a pair of hostile F-16s. With the F-16s having been chased away, the two Allied jets can pivot to a close air support mission profile. First in, the US Air Force's latest fighter, the F-35, which entered service in 2016 and made its combat debut in 2019 as part of operations against the so-called Islamic State. Those same two F-16s we saw earlier are now playing the part of friendly forces and are also drawn into the fight. The prototype F-16 was developed here at Edwards and made its first flight by accident during a high-speed taxi run in 1974. Almost 50 years on, it is still in production, with more than 4,500 F-16s having been built for more than 24 military operators. Over the course of the mission, forward air controllers have identified the presence of a further large and valuable target that needs to be quickly eliminated. They make the rare decision to call in a heavy strategic bomber, which normally operate well behind enemy lines, but which will instead be integrated into the close air support mission. That part was played by a B-1B Lancer, about to provide one of the highlights of the show as it pitches up now for a full aileron roll. Its participation in the Aerospace Valley Airshow was particularly welcome given the fleet's high operational tempo, chronically low mission-capable rates, and serious reliability problems, including with the wing sweep mechanism. Now, a mock bombing run with a huge burst of ground pyro. While all this is going on, the fighters are high above, flying in an air superiority wagon wheel from which they can detect and respond to any incoming threats. With the enemy retreating, a C-17 Globemaster overflies the airfield at 7,000 feet, inserting Special Forces troops. In a real mission, the aircraft could be carrying up to 102 fully armed paratroopers. The jumpers are using experimental chutes, currently being tested here at Edwards, which are capable of flying virtually noiselessly. That will help the parachutists arrive undetected, if under the cover of darkness. Once the parachutists are safely on the ground, the C-17 flies through at a lower altitude to visually confirm their safe arrival and drop further supplies if needed.
Masters and other crew members are waving to you at the back. Please feel free to wave to them. They can see you.
As the scenario draws to a close, all that is left is to recover the 4 fighters, which run in from the left for a break to land. Over the next few displays, we'll be enjoying a chronological review of some of the most famous training aircraft ever built. First up, it's Vicky Benzing in her Boeing Stearman.
Family, friends, and Team Taylor craft in her hometown of Watsonville on the California coast. She was thrilled by the spins, the loops, and the rolls that her ex-military instructor taught her. Aerobatic instruction with legendary pilot Amelia Reed.
We generally think of this as a Boeing product, and indeed this one was built by Boeing, but in fact the original design traces its roots back to the Stearman Aircraft Corporation Model 70, which first flew in 1933. At that point, the Stearman Aircraft Corporation was an independent company, but it became a subsidiary of Boeing the following year. In 1936, the design was further refined, creating this, the Stearman Model 75. It was intended as a rugged and dependable trainer for the US Army, and as such, it had an open cockpit. The prevailing wisdom at the time was that student pilots would get a better feel for their aircraft if they could feel the wind blowing around their head. The design proved extremely popular in military hands, with a total of 24 military operators from 21 nations. But the Stearman also played an important civilian role, particularly after the end of the Second World War, when hundreds of surplus aircraft were sold onto the civilian market. There, many of them were used for barnstorming, the birth perhaps of the modern civilian airshow industry. After graduating from the Stearman, student pilots might very well find themselves flying an aircraft like this. The T-6 Texan family trained more pilots than any other aircraft type in history, with more than 15,000 examples produced, operated by an incredible total of more than 60 nations. In fact, despite flying for the first time in 1935, the Texan continued to be used operationally into the mid-1990s with the South African Air Force. One example was used as a tailwheel trainer by the British Empire Test Pilot School up until 2016. This particular aircraft was built in 1944 as an SNJ-5, a navalised version of the T-6, which was fitted with an arrestor hook. She was based at MCAS El Toro, and for that reason she's been painted with a tail code WD. WD for Walt Disney. And that is in recognition of the fact that Disney designed El Toro's base mascot. The aircraft is flown today by its owner of more than 40 years, John Colbert. Its display is a salute to military veterans, but particularly to his father, who fought in the Second World War. This aircraft, meanwhile, was one of the very first dedicated jet trainers, the T-33 Shooting Star.
7 less than was required. What allowed Kelly to operate the Skunk Works so effectively and efficiently was his unconventional organizational approach. He broke the rules, essentially.
The T-33 traces its roots back to the Lockheed P-80, which was the first operational American jet fighter. That type was introduced to service in 1945, but being a single-seater, it was rather tricky to train pilots to fly it.
1943, as I mentioned, Kelly Johnson brought together a hand-picked team of young Lockheed Aircraft Corporation engineers and manufacturing people to rapidly and secretly.
And so, in 1948, the T-33 made its first flight. It was effectively an unarmed P-80 with a stretched fuselage in order to accommodate a 2-seat cockpit. Although painted to represent a Lockheed-built T-33 Shooting Star of the US Air Force, this particular airframe was built by Canadair for the Royal Canadian Air Force as a CT-133 Silver Star. 656 of those were built, starting in 1952.
And team members were even more to be careful how they answered the phones. Well, the team engineer named Colbert was a fan of Al Capp's newspaper comic strip.
This jet is one of 3 owned by Greg Collier's Acemaker airshows. While his solo displays are a stalwart of the North American airshow scene, this year he debuted a new 2-ship act.
Native of California, took his first flight at the age of 7 in Sonoma. Hooked ever since, he earned his pilot's license at the age of 18, flew while serving in the U.S. Army in the 1980s.
While we didn't see it at Edwards, we hope to enjoy it at some point in the future. This is also a training aircraft of sorts. It's Chuck Coleman in the Extra 300L.
Hundreds of air shows now. They've given 3,000 rides. I'm getting a little big there. In aerobatic aircraft, including again the cast members of Top Gun Maverick. He He's flown with Burt Rutan, the Proteus, utilized for scientific research. Chuck has also performed chase duties for programs such
And
as
yes,
the
this is
Collier
of course an
Trophy winning
aerobatic
Space
aeroplane first and foremost, not a trainer, but it has 2 seats, and Chuck uses it not only for air shows, but also for upset recovery training and G-tolerance training. In fact, he did exactly that for the actors who participated in Top Gun Maverick to prepare them for flights in the Super Hornet. Now, we've all seen square loops before. This is a 4-sided loop, but offset by 45 degrees to create a diamond in the sky.
Follow him on social media and you can see how all of the actors dealt with his aerobatic flying in the early days before they actually started filming.
The fact that it has 2 seats is one of the main reasons why the Extra 300L has been the best-selling aircraft in Extra's lineup, even though its performance doesn't quite live up to its single-seat stablemates.
Makes his way through Chuck.
Chuck is an extremely accomplished all-round aviator and engineer. He worked on the C-17 and was the senior design engineer for NASA's F-18-based high angle of attack research vehicle. He was also involved in the conversion of the Blue Angel's new Super Hornets. And he's a very accomplished test pilot too, having flown such outlandish designs as the Icon A5, the Proteus, and the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer.
Rolling back the other way. Remember, each input introduces drag. The airplane wants to lose altitude as he continues to climb and complete it right at show center here in a beautiful series of maneuvers.
Now, on to our contributions from NASA. And first up, it's the recently retired airborne observatory, SOFIA. Housed aboard a 747 SP, SOFIA is a collaboration between NASA and the German Aerospace Centre. The intention was to create a telescope that could rise above most of the water vapour present in Earth's atmosphere to give it a clearer image into space. The project began in 2010 and was concluded on the 29th of September this year.
Richie, watch out for the tower. Richie, I'll take it.
Here comes a trio of NASA's other aircraft, the G3, F-15 and F-18.
G3, let's just enjoy this.
In the lead, an ex-US Air Force C-20, basically a Gulfstream 3. NASA has used C-20s to test new radar systems and anti-collision systems, act as a chase plane and conduct various airborne experiments. This one is being used to test new flexible wing flap technology, whereby rather than having structurally separate flaps and control surfaces, the shape of the wing itself changes. If successful, this technology will reduce drag by eliminating panel gaps on the aerofoil. The two jets, meanwhile, have climbed to altitude. The F-15 will accelerate to supersonic speeds to create a conventional sonic boom, while the F-18 is performing what NASA calls a low-boom dive manoeuvre to simulate what they think a sonic boom will sound like from their upcoming X-59 flying testbed, which it is hoped will pave the way for supersonic flight over populated areas. The F-15's boom will reach us just before the Hornet's much softer boom.
Now listen for the quiet one. And there it was. Did you hear that, folks? Barely a thump, ladies and gentlemen, in the second one.
Yes, well, quite why they chose to play music over that entirely oral demonstration is quite frankly a mystery to mankind, especially when the point was to show us how quiet it was. But never mind, and on we go. The recovery of the fighters. NASA has 3 of each of these types, used primarily for research support.
I want to make it to Air Force Academy.
I think you, folks, by applause, I think you would agree that what we see flying by us right now is
We return now to the civilian scene and one of two formation teams that took part in the show. This is Dawn Patrol, so named because they practice every Saturday at 7 AM to avoid the heat of the day. They're passing by in a double Vic formation, and then returning to us in airplane formation.
Dawn Patrol formation team. Precision is everything. These guys are so good. It almost looks easy.
They fly a mix of Van's RV kit planes, but primarily the Van's RV-6. Although these are aerobatic capable aircraft, this is not a team display in the manner that we're used to seeing on this programme. There's no breaking down of the team into separate groups, no formation aerobatics, and indeed no aerobatics at all. This is instead a series of rather genteel passes, each one demonstrating a different formation shape.
One of the hardest formations. Overhead in a beautiful Delta formation.
Now the classic six-ship shape, Delta. So the final pass from Dawn Patrol in from the right as they set up to land. If you're wondering why we're not showing those takeoffs and landings, by the way, it's because the primary runway was around 1.5 kilometres away, which didn't make for easy viewing.
One up. Two up.
Some of the lighter acts took off on a taxiway running perpendicular to the crowd line, and that was true of our next flying display participant, Bob Carlton, in his Super Salto. The H101 Salto was designed in Germany, a nation which, along with Poland, leads the world in glider design. Salto is the German word for loop, reflecting the aircraft's aerobatic credentials. It was developed from a much more conventional glider, but fitted with, among other things, a V-tail and trailing edge air brakes, so they produce less drag when retracted. It has fairly short wings as gliders go, a span of 13 metres compared to a more typical 20 metres or so, and as a result the glide ratio is fairly modest at 34:1. Again, a glide ratio of 40:1 would be more typical. But these trade-offs offer far superior manoeuvrability compared to the average glider, and a maximum load factor of +7 or -5G. That's not outstanding compared to more modern aerobatic specialised gliders, but it is pretty good, and it's more than enough performance to allow for some very graceful aerobatics such as those that we've been watching. But that performance is still not enough for pilot, owner and retired rocket scientist Bob Carlton. He activates the PBS TJ100 engine he's had fitted above and behind the cockpit. That is a small Czech 4th generation turbojet producing a little under 300 pounds of thrust.
On a glider, and he's solved his tow plane problems, and he's come up with an award-winning airshow act. And to top this, he's actually designing yet another sailplane with not one, but two jets.
It's more usually used in cruise missiles and as the auxiliary power unit on fighter jets. Next up, the evocative sight and sound of P-51D Mustang, Man o' War.
Brought to you by Palm Springs Air Museum.
This particular Mustang was built in 1945 and shipped to England, but was too late to see service in the Second World War. She was returned to the United States in readiness for the Korean War, but didn't see any action there either. She was bought initially by Universal Studios and used as a film prop, before being restored to flying condition at Chino in the 1970s. She was painted up as man-of-war at around that time. That was the aircraft flown by United States Army Air Force pilot Colonel Claiborne Kinnard.
And you heard just a moment there a musical note harmonizing the music of that Merlin engine. That doesn't come from the air dance.
He was, for a time, the commander of both the 4th and 355th Fighter Groups based in England during the Second World War. He's credited with destroying 8 enemy aircraft in aerial combat and another 17 on the ground.
The sound of history, fleeting all over us, the P-52. Still enough to fight the enemy if they had to. Beautiful photographs of the P-51s.
For the penultimate act of the show, we were treated to a display by one of the highest achieving aerobatic pilots in the world today, 11 times US national aerobatic champion, Rob Holland.
Fitness about how he can tolerate both these positive and negative genes. Rob Holland.
Famously, Rob flies a customised MXS known as the MXS RH, designed by Australian company MX Aircraft specifically for his style of flying. Its performance is quite exceptional. It has a 350 horsepower Lycoming AEIO 540 engine. It's stressed to plus or minus 16 G and is capable of rolling at 450 degrees per second. All of that surpasses the performance of the much more mainstream Extra 330.
The World Championships. Rob Holland. Precise, incredible flying is only Rob Holland can.
At this show, however, Rob was displaying his MX2. That's a 2-seat version of the standard MXS, the main difference being the larger, less streamlined cockpit canopy than its single-seat stablemate. Nonetheless, the quality of the display is exceptionally high. Rob is not only highly skilled, but is also phenomenally inventive. He's designed many of the manoeuvres you're seeing demonstrated, and to this day, almost nobody else is flying them.
Incredibly precise. Man, how he can maintain the altitude with all those inputs right across and then come out of that again with those punishing negative G's. Insane. Again, flipping the airplane over and very quickly regaining all the control and precisely stopping those.
That style of flying is not perhaps conducive to the known and unknown categories of competition aerobatics, which is perhaps why Rob has never won the world aerobatic title, but it has seen him achieve unprecedented success in the freestyle category, achieving the highest score in that category on 5 occasions at the World Championships.
Rob Holland, he straps into it, and those wings are his wings. He is so at one with it. If you want to see his point of view, he's all over social media. Rob Holland, of course, has cameras all over that airplane, inside 360 views as he challenges the sun right now as he has flipped the airplane into land again, and he's flying out of that now as he drops out of those powerful rays in this incredible routine.
We've seen slide-offs before. This is a slide-off with a snap roll in the middle of it, then straight back into that slide. No corrections, no imperfections, outstanding. And transitioning from that into a torque roll, It's not just the standard of manoeuvres that's impressive, but it's the fluidity of the overall sequence. Absolutely relentless, unpredictable, and flown to perfection. And this is also very impressive. A manoeuvre designed by Rob, which is named the Frisbee, an abrupt pull, and the aircraft spins on its y-axis as it crosses the sky. But now, as Rob dives out of that manoeuvre, we pick our moment to move on from that tremendous display of aerobatic competency and take a look at the final act of the show. It's the 6 F-16s of the Thunderbirds. I remember the first time I saw the Thunderbirds, not that many years ago, and being bitterly disappointed by what was an accurately flown but rather disjointed and drawn-out spectacle. But I'm happy to report that is no longer the case, because in 2021 the Thunderbirds updated the choreography of their show for the first time in many years, making it shorter, slicker, and much more engaging. It really is like watching a whole different team, and one that can now stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the best in the world. Now, the two solos in from crowd rear for the crossover break. A good look here at the very tight formations that the Thunderbirds can hold, especially during the non-aerobatic phases of the display. As little as half a metre of separation between aircraft at times. And then the illusion of proximity in this cheat mirror formation. It's not a true mirror because the two jets are displaced laterally, but as they pass the camera they briefly appear to be much, much closer together than would be possible with only vertical separation. Now stand by for the first sneak pass of the show. Thunderbirds 1 to 4 pass in echelon formation, and then in comes Thunderbird 5. The F-16 has very good performance in roll. It's limited by the flight control software to 270 degrees per second, which makes it pretty much the fastest rolling frontline fighter in production today. And then, an opposition knife edge pass. Look out for some pretty notable top rudder in the knife edge portion, lifting the nose by about 10 degrees, then applying that top rudder to maintain altitude. Main formation changing from line astern to box. Then they'll get back in line astern and run in towards the crowd, what's known in North America as the Y-axis, but elsewhere in the world as the B-axis. And we're about to see that same formation change all over again, but this time while going over the top of a quarter clover. Twisting that loop through 90 degrees on the downline to clear the way for another sneak pass. Chasing down the main formation there to join up in Stinger formation. They approach on the B-axis once again for the low bomb burst. That's not the end of that manoeuvre though. The 5 aircraft give themselves a little space and then immediately get themselves turned around to converge back on show centre. pulling up in line abreast for the line break loop. During any manoeuvre like this, where it's important to show a smoke trail, they have to be very careful to make sure that the design of the show isn't going to necessitate the use of afterburner. That smoke oil is vaporising in the jet efflux, creating those lovely smoke trails, but with the reheat engaged, the efflux becomes too hot and the smoke doesn't vaporise, it becomes invisible. Incidentally, that's why there aren't many teams with afterburning jets that use coloured smoke systems. Engaging the afterburner there not only makes the smoke oil fail to vaporise, but it actually burns the coloured dye. You get a very different form of smoke trail. The Thunderbirds have tried using coloured smoke over the years, and that's the reason why they haven't adopted it. Here, afterburner is engaged, and as you can see, no visible smoke. Now we see 6 aircraft flying in a single delta formation, pitching up for a barrel roll. Very nicely flown, and perhaps representative of the Thunderbirds' routine as a whole, really. We saw the Patrouille de France last episode flying some very sophisticated manoeuvres indeed, but with little imperfections creeping into most of them. This is sort of the opposite. They're mostly quite uncomplicated manoeuvres that we've been seeing, but impeccably well executed. And the same is true of this next manoeuvre as well, the simple but spectacular Delta Burst. So the Thunderbird show enters its final few manoeuvres. Solos in from the left and right for the final time. And the Diamond now pitch up for arguably their most spectacular manoeuvre, the high bomb burst. Smoke standing out brilliantly in the clear blue skies of Edwards Air Force Base. That brings our coverage of the 2022 Aerospace Valley Airshow to a close. We've got one more episode to go in this series of airshow dispatches. Next month, we're back in Australia for Wings over Illawarra. But until then, from me, Adam Landau, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye for now.